I'm Bob Darrow. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here. Anyone that I sponsor is very familiar with This Was Our Course. I was one of those guys that did a lot of versions of the fourth step before I did one in the book. And I reaped pretty much nothing from it, outside of disclosing a few secrets. And, you know, I was very honest in my inventories, but nothing really changed. And I had misinformation about what the inventory process is about. I thought it was about self-knowledge. You know that old idea that if you know better, you do better? Well, how many of us know better and don't do better? Right? And so I was 4 years sober, and I was suffering from untreated alcoholism. And this is not uncommon. I know guys that are sober 30 years and they're still angry all the time. They still have conflict problems. They're never wrong. They're very defended. And if you look, and I've picked up some of those guys to sponsor, and it's not uncommon that they missed a big part of the transformational process in step 4. And so when I was a little over 4 years sober, I'd just taken a guy, a sponsor, through. I got him to do a 4th step exactly as it's outlined in the book. We sat down with that book. When it said list, we listed. When it said pray, we prayed. When it said ask, we asked. When it said realize, we realized. And we got to the bottom of page 66. And some of you who've tried to do this out of the book, you got 3 columns that are really, you know, on the first column you got the name of the perpetrator, pretty much. Second column you got the heinous acts that they performed, you know, the little bullet points. And in the third column, you got what was the damage done, what was affected, hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with. And that is necessary to go into that abyss of justification and all that crap in order to dismantle this thing called the ego. And Harry Tiebout, who was mentioned a lot in AA literature, and he was Bill Wilson's therapist for a period of time. He's also the one who brought Marty Mann into AA. Tiebout used to say that we must have ego reduction in depth. And I think that this is where that begins, and this was our course. We got the first 3 columns. Okay, you got the cases built, and none of it's new information. We got all that stuff on file. I could tell you what my 2nd grade teacher did wrong. You know, all those decades later, I got a file on her. I got a file on my uncle. I got a file on my mother, my father. I got files on these people. And then you know what happens when you have a resentment. You watch them because you need new pages in the file. Well, I don't watch them to see what they're doing right. I watch them to see what they're doing wrong to make my judgment right. Because the ego doesn't care about anything except being right and being in control. My ego it doesn't matter if it kills me, as long as after I'm dead everybody goes around saying, oh, that Bob was right, though. He was right. So I got these first 3 columns, and the book spends all of page 66 trying to get me to buy an idea that will change my life if I can get it in here, my innermost self. And this is very much like step 6, can be easily placated but not so easily done internally. Because it's talking about doing it, in both cases, it's innermost self stuff, right? Not up here, in here. And so after it spends all of 66 telling me this stuff's going to kill me, it's poison, it's infinitely grave, it's going to cut me off from the sunlight of the spirit, the insanity of alcohol, return, I'll drink it, drinks to die. If I was to live, I had to be free of this anger. And then after it says all that and gets you to the point like, oh my God, I got to do something here. All right, you're almost ready to swear to yourself, that's it, I'm not going to be angry ever again. And then it says, but you can't wish these resentments away any more than alcohol. And I was going through this before I ever did it. Right before I ever did it, I was going through it with a guy sponsor who had a lot of resentments. And he looks at me and he says, well, then what do I do? And the next couple words on the page, it said, this was our course. And so I said to him, well, this was our course. Like I knew. I didn't know. Right? I didn't know. And we started to try to talk about and do what it says. It's a two-part realization. First part's easy. Wilson's funny. He'll hook you in with something, and then he gives you the good stuff that's going to change you later. Well, he hooks you in. He says, we had to realize, now this is innermost self stuff, make real. Had to realize that the person who would harm me was perhaps spiritually sick. Yes, they are. And they're stupid too. Right? You know that the ego loves that smug superiority of a well person looking down on a sick person. Now, if that was all that it said, I don't think any of us would get any better. But once it's gotten me to fully concede to my innermost self that these people on this list are perhaps spiritually sick, it's going to show me how that's true. Because the second part of the realization is this, even though I didn't like their symptoms, and I remember talking to this guy about that. What symptoms are they talking about? Is it the fact that the guy's phone went off in the meeting? I mean, is it what symptoms are they talking about? And we just both had this awakening. They're talking about the second column, the bullet points, the little brief descriptions of what actually happened. And so the implication is, so you mean to say that if this guy wasn't spiritually sick, he wouldn't have done to you what he did to you? If he was right with his own internal moral compass, if he was right with his own values, if he was right with himself and with God and the world about him, would he have done that? Or even better, look at the things that you've done that you regret and the people you hurt. Even though you may not have meant to, would you have done those things if you weren't spiritually sick? And I started saying, oh my God, those are the symptoms. So it's not the person I hate, it's the symptoms. It's like there's a Christian minister who says all the time, hate the sin, love the sinner. And so I'm starting to separate the person from what they did and know and start to know a little bit that what they did was a symptom of their sickness. And then it says, even though I didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturbed me, and how did they disturb me? The third column, pocketbook, emotional security, pride, all the things that it lists in there. So granted, I don't like the symptoms, and I don't like the way these symptoms affected me and disturbed me and maybe hurt me or threatened me. But then here's the kicker. They're asking me to do something that's very, very hard to do, especially if you are an egomaniac and obsessed with being right. It says we had to realize that this person was like us, spiritually sick. That dismantles the whole position of a well person looking down on a sick person. This is putting me in a place where I have to get off my high horse, off my throne of judgment, and get down to earth and get honest and genuine and humble with myself enough to realize that if I had the childhood that person had, if I was afraid like that person was afraid, if I was frustrated, if I was selfish and self-obsessed the way that person was, do I get it? that I could really have done to someone else what they did to me. And then all the egocentric feelings of smug superiority that come about as a result of the judgment start to dissolve away. And this is a game changer for some of us. I know it was for me. When I started to do that, I started to look. The book says we looked at it from an entirely different angle. When I stopped being the prosecutor and went on the defense table and started looking at it through their eyes, the eyes of the people that had hurt me. When I looked at my childhood and the things that I found objectionable with my parents, but I looked at it through their eyes, I got it. I understood. I know why they stopped helping me, why they would have nothing to do with me. I tortured them emotionally for years. They spent a fortune on me. Therapists, treatment centers, bail bondsmen, lawyers. And the more they tried to help me, the sicker I got, until in desperation, exasperation, they just threw up their hands and just decided their marriage, this is hurting their marriage, it's hurting everything. We can't have anything to do with him. And isn't it odd? From the moment I was thwarted, the alcoholic ego hates to be thwarted. The moment they rejected me, wouldn't give me money anymore, wouldn't help me, wouldn't bail me out of jail, the minute they started that, I found a way to connect every problem in my life to them. It's really their fault. And I started blaming them for everything in my life. And I carried that. Sometimes I get drunk and I tell people, I know I messed up, but you got to understand, my parents threw me away. They never loved me. I grew up without love, which was such a lie, because no one ever sacrificed more for me. No one ever bared up under the abuse, and I was abusive. I threatened my dad one time. I stole so much from my mother and father that my dad became friends with the guy who owned the pawn shop in the town he lived in from buying his own things back. My mother, when they finally cut me out of their life, I got to make amends to them and have some conversations about this, but I know it was the hardest thing they ever did. The hardest thing they ever did. And my mother now was, even though she worked for MHMR, she now was seeing her own therapist and taking medication. And my father was sleeping 15 hours a day, because they could cut me out of their life, but they couldn't cut me out of their heart, evidently. And they suffered from my alcoholism. And I would go around the big shot saying, well, I never hurt anybody except myself. What a bunch of crap. But you have to other-center yourself genuinely, humbly, and honestly before you start to see it from their side of the street. And I thought my parents were, they just wouldn't understand me, and they didn't really love me. The truth was, if the tables were turned, I wouldn't have put up with a tenth of what they put up with. And I did the same thing for my exes, and what became very apparent, I thought that she was I won't use the word, God. And the truth was, she gave me several chances, and the truth was that if it would have been turned around and it was me, I wouldn't have. And you start to get a picture of the truth. And the truth is that people were kinder and more tolerant and more forgiving and more accepting of me than I ever would have been to them if somebody would have done, if it was turned around. And a universe that had been unfair, unjust, and hostile, I started to realize the only person that's unfair, unjust, and hostile is me. That what it says in our book, that our misery is of our own making. It arises out of ourselves And the alcoholic, me, is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I usually don't think so. I think you are. You are. And this cultivated ability to cast blame and defend myself is unbelievable. I've told my sponsor many years ago, I said, I should be able to will my brain to the Army, and they could hook it up to missiles and stuff for a defense mechanism or network, because it's so defended. It's so unbelievably defended. And my sponsor said to me on many occasions, he said, people don't drink from making mistakes, they drink from defending them. And boy, is that true. I've known people that are dead today that I tried to talk to before they went out, and you couldn't talk to them. They were too defended. They were too right. And we don't grow at all. And we grow backwards from being right. We grow from being wrong and our willingness to be wrong, because it right sizes us. It humbles us. And you know that that's true, because if it wasn't, if you could grow from being right, somewhere in the grapevine somewhere it would say, and when we were right, we promptly admitted it. But it doesn't say that. It's when we were wrong, we promptly admit it, because we grow from that. And the ego hates it. The ego hates this was our course. I've known guys that I'm doing the steps with them, and they get to this part, and I don't understand if it's they cannot or they will not other-center themselves enough to genuinely get it from the other person's point of view from an entirely different angle. I just know that the end result is some of those people don't stay sober. Some of them are sober 30 years and they're angry and they're miserable. Some of them leave AA. I understand why you leave AA. Because you start noticing what's wrong with the people in AA. Because it's inevitable. If you're an egomaniac, judgmental guy, it's inevitable that you're going to start nudging yourself out of AA one judgment at a time. And I'm a funny guy. Maybe some of you are like this. If you are, God bless you. I can walk into a room and my first response is to notice problems. I've never walked into a new situation and just saw the potential for love and joy. I walk into a new situation, I see people that I think I'm going to have a problem with. Right? And because it's like a defense, it's a problem-seeking missile. And I look at, but I don't see the good. Truly sometimes today, actually quite a bit, I can find myself in a situation and I've trained myself to look for the good. It's not my natural position. My natural position is to defend myself against problems that haven't occurred yet, and most of them never do. But that doesn't stop me from solving them. I had a guy sponsor one time, he said to me, you're always bad rapping, worrying, saying you don't need to worry. I said, I'll tell you something. I've looked back over my life and nothing I ever worried about's come true. Maybe that worrying works. Now that's alkalogic, if I've ever heard it. And this was our course. It's asking me to really wake up to the me that is in you. And when you do that, I think forgiveness is it's automatic. I think some people, they when they get to the part where resentments are going to kill you, and your sponsor may say to you, we're going to have to forgive him. So, okay, I forgive him. No, you don't. No, you don't. No. Because you're still imagining them dying in a fiery car wreck or something, And the next time you're in a room with them, want to know if you forgave someone truly, truly, truly? Get up close and personal to them in some situation and see if you start having conversations with them in your head. Because with forgiveness comes, with understanding comes the forgiveness, and with that comes the peace that you're really okay. You don't need correction. You're perfect the way you are. Perfect. And so I started to do that, and it was just such a game changer for me. You know, I think for some of us, it's the very beginning of acquiring something that we've placated but never truly had, and that's compassion. I want the bragging rights of a compassionate guy, but still maintain being the judgmental guy. But compassion comes from two Latin words, co meaning with, and passio is the root word for pain. When you have compassion, you have the ability to sit with someone's pain. In other words, I see you. I can imagine the backstory and what it would have to be, because it would be the same thing that would have to be true for me to act like you. I understand your fear. And people in AA, this becomes a tremendous 12-step tool. Because an alcoholic properly armed with information about himself, who has the ability to other-center himself and put himself in the shoes of other people, can be effective where nobody else can. I remember I was a year sober. Some woman who was sober a long time, an old timer, came up to me, looked me right in the eye, and she said, "You're afraid a lot, aren't you?" I went, "Oh." What does she know? I mean, and I didn't even know I was afraid a lot until she said it, and I said, "Oh my God, I am." It was like crazy. But she knew, because she knows that everybody sober as long as I was still had a lot of fear. And she watched how I positioned myself, and my ego tried to overshadow the fear. You know, we're overcompensators. I had experience with a guy who he came out of prison, and he had tattoos all over his face and neck, and he'd been the head of the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. Now that's a very violent that's a nasty organization, if you've ever been in prison. And he's telling me, he's in the car, and he's telling me about all the people he shivved and killed and had killed. And I just said to him what I knew to be the truth. I said, "You must have had a lot of fear." And he caught his breath. And he said, after a minute or two, he just looked at me and he said, "Nobody's ever said that to me. Is it true?" And he said, "Yeah, I had that knot in the pit of my stomach constantly. And I covered it up with violence. The truth is, I was scared to death." How do I know that? Because I know me. I know that every time I ever did any of that stuff, the blustering, the violence, the anger, the rage, it's because the truth is I'm afraid. And I have guys I sponsor. Now, this probably doesn't happen in Pennsylvania, but sometimes new guys will lie to you. I mean, it's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, Jesus. Sometimes old timers will lie to you. Right? And I get it. It's for the same. Alcoholics, we lie a lot. There's an old adage about telling alcoholics lying, his lips are moving. But it's not because we're liars. It's because we're afraid. I'm scared. I'm scared of I'm not enough. I'm afraid I'm not enough. So I have to enhance me so maybe you'll like me. I'm afraid you're not going to accept me or like me as is. And you know why that is for me? Because I don't. And if I'm not enough for me, how the hell can I be enough for you? So I enhance Bob. I give you the flashy Bob. It's Bob, but it's Bob on steroids kind of Bob. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not really me. It's an enhanced version of me. And I do it because I'm afraid. And this is crazy. And the longer I'm sober, the truer this is. That if it's true for me, 9 chances out of 10, it's true for you too. we're not that much different. We think we are. We all come here suffering from terminal uniqueness. And then as you peel away the layers of the onion, you start to find every other member of Alcoholics Anonymous underneath the layers of the onion. That we really are the same. There was a great movie, I really liked it a lot. Some of you probably saw it, won a lot of awards, Avatar. And there were parts of Avatar that were Buddhist or Hindu kind of in nature. When those people, the tall blue people, would look at each other and they'd look in their eyes and they'd go, I see you. And this was more than just seeing the physical presence. That what it implied in what they're saying is, I really see you. And that's what I felt when I was new. That the old timers who had done this work, who had that other-centered, genuine, humble consciousness, they knew more about me than I did. It's crazy. And I followed a lot of them around. I mean, if there was a couple old timers, not everybody that was an old timer. There's some old timers I needed a drink, I think, but that's just me. But there was some that just seemed to know stuff. They knew stuff about me. How did they know that? And I'd follow them around. And one of my favorite poems from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is a Middle Eastern book of poetry. And it says that he who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. Shun him. But he who knows, but knows not that he knows, is asleep. Wake him. And he who knows not, but knows that he knows not, is a child. Teach him. And he who knows and knows that he knows is wise. Follow him. And that's what it was like with these people who had done Alcoholics Anonymous. Not just staying sober, going to meetings, but they had really done the work. They knew stuff that I don't know. And they would just constantly lay these things on me that were so true. I remember my first sponsor just had me, he kept talking to me about selfishness and self-centeredness. And I knew, and he had me read that part of the book, page 60, 63. And I knew because he started getting into that with me, and the minute I started reading about it in the book, I could see there was a lot of people in AA like that. And I thought he was tasking me with, helping him. I was going to help him, right? And it was really me. And it was me. In the last, after this was our course, and if you do this was our course, truly do it in here, then there's a prayer that's absolutely appropriate and legitimate and genuine. Because if you really understand this person and the things and you get a sense of the things that drove him or the childhood that he might have twisted him a little bit or whatever that's in him that's making him be the way he is. When you start to get a sense of that, then the prayer is genuine, because the prayer is we ask God to help me, to show them, which is an action. It's like to demonstrate towards them, to approach them, to show them the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So I went through a little thing with a guy's sponsor many years ago, and I said, he had a hard time with this. And I said, let's imagine something, okay? Let's imagine that the reason that this guy is so hostile and so uptight and so difficult and toxic to be around, what if you discovered he had a brain tumor and it was pressing on his brain and making him that way? How would you think of him then? And he said, well, yeah, but that's different. And I said, well, is it? Aren't we just as helpless over our own spiritual condition at times as we were as if we had a brain tumor? And if you don't think that's true, discover, most of us, sober a little while, we discover, oh my God, I'm self-centered. All right. Let's not be that way ever again. It doesn't hold water. It's like trying to carry water in a net. It doesn't, it's a good intention. It's a good intention, but it doesn't hold the water. So we can't wish this stuff away anymore. In alcohol, I'm asking God to help me to show them what they deserve. What they deserve. See, I want to show them death and torture. That's not what they do. What they deserve is the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. If I really get it in the pit of my stomach that person can no more help being the way they were when they hurt me than I could help being the way I was when I hurt a whole bunch of people. See, if it's just for me, it's just for you. If it's mercy for me, it's mercy for you. It can't be as the ego wants, mercy for me and justice for you. It's one, pick one. You get to pick one. And so I started to really realize that, and the prayer was a good prayer. And then the last thing is often misinterpreted. In the middle of page 67, there's a paragraph, which is the fourth column, I think, because there's really nothing to write in the realization. It's just a realization, and there's nothing to write in the prayer. It's a prayer, but not to be overlooked. In the last part, it starts off by saying, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. We resolutely looked for our own mistakes. And a couple lines down that paragraph before, right after the questions, to uncover what we're looking for to eventually make amends. It says we disregard the other person involved entirely. Entirely is like a lot. And so what the misnomer in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this was true for me for years, I would talk about the fourth step in the end, in the resentment section at the end. We're looking for our part. It doesn't say that anywhere in AA literature. We're not looking for our part. Because if you do that, you're reserving the right to still blame them somewhat. It's like if I'm going to look for my part, okay, here's my part right here. Unconsciously, I'm reserving the right to think that they have a part, and of course, their part would be more heinous than mine. And so we don't look for parts, we look for mistakes. Where was I asleep and I mistaking from reality the real truth about what happened here? Where did I miss it? Where was I so much up inside myself and being so pathetically petty and judgmental and childish that I missed what was really going on here? And I miss that stuff a lot because I jump to the negative. I jump to the negative. So one of the great things about that prayer of St. Francis, I had decades where I'd say that almost every morning, and it sets you off to start looking for the positive and bringing the positive rather than being the needy guy who's so judgmental. So when I finished this, over the years, everyone I've ever sponsored, I really stressed this was our course because it was the game changer for me. Now, maybe other people, the game changer was referring back to our list, or the third column, or the prayer. But this was our course, is what changed my life. And many years ago, I went through a terrible divorce, and it changed the whole thing. My wife, at the time, this is 30 years ago, I guess. 30. It was a long time ago. And I got a divorce because my wife was sleeping with my sponsee and best friend for the whole last year of my marriage. Didn't understand it. When I used this process for them, I was able to go to them and make amends. And I know there's somebody, I could hear your thoughts. You're going to make amends? Well, they did that to you. No, there's no one-sided separation. And we all make mistakes. And I went and I made amends to him, and I sponsor that guy to this day. And her and I, she doesn't go to AA anymore. She's found out, it's funny, there's more of these around than you imagine. She wasn't an alcoholic, never was. She was a teenager who drank too much and acted out and came to AA for emotional problems. And she can have a drink today. She doesn't. It's really a travesty that there are people who end up in AA for some reason because they're in trouble, and they can actually drink. And here's the travesty. Most of them don't want to. Oh my God, if I could drink, I'd be drunk every day. I mean, you know what? Right? But they don't get from alcohol what I get from alcohol. And so that got me through that. And then I had a guy who I just ran into his wife. I was down, Marnie and I were down in Texas, and we went to a noon meeting, and he couldn't come. He had stuff going on to meet us there. We were just there briefly. It was my friend John, Reno John, and when he was fairly new, we did a fifth step, and he had a bad resentment towards his dad. And it was an understandable, it was the kind of resentment you go, oh yeah, I get it. His dad was not only a bad drunk, but he was violent. I mean, put you in the hospital with a broken arm violent. Contusion violent. Black eye violent. He had a childhood that was a nightmare. And he hated his dad. Hated his dad. And we try to do this was our course, and he's having none of it. He's having none of it. My dad, you want me to see how I'm perhaps like my dad? No. He's not having none of it. And so we start to move on, and I sometimes inspiration comes from God. When you have that divine inspiration, you'll say things that are really a lot smarter than you really are. Just comes out of you. And I stopped him. I said, I want to go back to another resentment. He thought initially I wanted to talk more about his dad. I said, no, not that. I said, back in the beginning, you had a resentment towards that woman you lived with for a lot of years, and you had kids, and she had kids, and she eventually dumped you, and you resented it. I said, yeah. I said, it just occurred to me. I was wondering if in that whole relationship, if there was ever a time when you were on drugs or hungover or drunk where you might have done anything to hurt those kids. And the blood ran out of his face. And he hung his head, and I don't know what's going on with this guy. And he lifts his head back up, and he's got a tear coming down one side of his face, and he says in this horrible choked whisper, he said, I guess I'm just like my goddamn father. And it opened a door, and we started talking about that, and one of the things that he started to wake up to was how that he couldn't stand himself for what he did any more than his dad possibly couldn't stand him for what he did. And he eventually went and to go make amends to his dad. And he actually, his dad had lived in the part of California not too far from where Scott was from, up in the high desert, in a trailer. That if you're really bad, you'll come back living in a trailer in California in the high desert. I mean, that's they're just bleak. But anyway, he went to this trailer park and knocked on the door, and his dad opened the door. He said he was scared to death. He said he felt like there was going to be a monster on the other side of that door. And instead, it was this little old man that shook and wasn't doing really well. And depressed, and he'd heard from his sister. He hadn't talked to his dad in a long time, but his sister had said that his dad has been forced to not drink by some internal problems with pancreas and liver, but his dad was not happy about the fact he can't drink. he was probably like you would be if you just couldn't drink without AA for years. And he was very depressed and just miserable. And he started to make amends to his dad. And when he started that, it was like a dam burst in his father. And his father started making amends for what he had done. And he never would have been able to do that if it wouldn't have been for the son's actions. Sandy Beach used to say, the person with the most tools gets to do the work. See, the son had the tools. The father didn't. But the son loaned the tools to his dad, and his dad needed to make amends to the son just as much as the son needed to make things right with the dad. And he spent several years until his dad died taking care of his dad. And I heard him one time in a meeting. He was sharing that the greatest thing Alcoholics Anonymous had given him next to his sobriety is he got his daddy back. And see, his dad, he hated his dad for being pretty much just like he was when he was the way he was. And isn't that what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous? We don't love people in AA because of the things they got right. Sometimes we love people because of their defects. Sometimes because of their flaws. Because that they struggle with the same stuff we struggle with. You know, I love Scott. Explains it all right there. We see ourselves in these people and we feel a connection. And maybe that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. There's a line in the book. It says our main purpose is to connect us with a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problem. And I've found the way to God is in trusting, helping, loving, and accepting his kids. How I treat God's kids determines the distance between me and God. On a bad day, when I'm full of opinions and judgments and stuff, God and I are very far apart. When those have been reduced and put down to some degree, or dialed down, then I feel closer to God. And it just seems to be a result of. And so Alcoholics Anonymous has really, truly been effective in me. Not to get me ego-free. Oh my God, I just never goes away. It's like a bad tumor. It just keeps coming back. But it dials it. It gives me some actions to take that dial it down. And as I dial me down, you seem to come closer, and so does God. My friend Ralph says it all the time. It's beautiful. He says, you want to grow God, shrink you. Shrink you. And Alcoholics Anonymous has helped me to have some ego reduction, not once and for all. It's a chronic spiritual malady, which means you can't ever get right enough to be right. You can't. You know, it's just like diabetes. Yesterday's maintenance of my blood sugar has no effect on today's diabetes. And yesterday's spiritual condition doesn't have much usefulness today. Because my ego was up all night while I slept, figuring stuff. You know? Do you ever have your head wake you up in the morning? Oh, I'm glad you're awake because there's some crap going to happen today. Wake up on high alert. Whoa. That's why we seek God immediately in the morning. Don't let that get a foothold or it'll be a bad day. So, this was our course. We must realize how the people who wronged us were perhaps like us, spiritually sick. Thanks for listening.